the great Bill K, folks. Now, before we leave the police cops segment, I just wanted to shed a light on, for me, because this is issues and answers. Okay, it's not just the issues, but this is
We like to
answers as
find
well.
answers. Yep.
Yes. I wanted to talk about really quick how U.S. police training compares with the rest of the world.
You know, I've been wondering about that
Yes.
myself.
So, to put everything into context, there are about 18,000 police agencies in the U.S., but there are no national standards on training procedures, and time scales vary across the country. On average, police officers spend around 21 weeks training. So that's about 5.5 months. That's like 5 months, 5 months in a week or so before they are qualified to go on the patrol. That is far less than most other developed countries, according to a report by the Institute for the Criminal Justice Training Reform, or the ICJTR. Here's some real context for you. In Finland, police officers have to go through over 5,000, close to 5,500 hours of training. In the country of Germany, they have to go through 4,000 hours of training. In Australia, they go through 3,500 or 3,500 hours of training. In England, they go through about 2,500 hours of training. In Canada, it's about 1,000 hours, and in the United States, it's about 500. So Finnish police are take about 10 times as long to train as Americans in terms of policing. So this is one of the reasons why
Finland.
Yes, in Finland.
I wonder how many people there are in Finland. I don't think Finland has a huge population.
They don't have to. They have good cops. They have cops that are trained.
And okay, well, what? Because I know every country, they have their own issues that they have to deal with. But, what are the things that they're training? Now that you got me thinking, I'm trying to remember going into the Air Force. How long was our training? Because you go through the academy, then you go through Air Base Ground Defense School. I think totally looking at about 8 months after boot camp of training.
So you guys are better trained in the military than the cops.
But on the other hand, the things that we were trained for, with everything up to and including somebody attacking a base.
Yeah.
So you're learning how to defend against an assault, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now the Air Force law enforcement personnel, they didn't have to go through Air Base Ground Defense School, so they just went through the Security Police Academy. But that was, I think, 90 days, 3 months. I think it was like 3 months.
So here's the report.
What are these other cities? These other countries. What are they training their cops to do?
We'll get into the report. Looked at police training requirements in more than 100 countries and found that the U.S. had the lowest in terms of average hours required. Also, many other countries require police officers to have a university degree or an equivalent before joining the police. But in the U.S., most forces just require the equivalent of a high school diploma.
Right.
In England and Wales, it has recently become mandatory for officers to have an academic degree. Maria Haberfeld, who's professor of police science at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, says some police forces in Europe have police university where training lasts for 3 years. For me, the standouts are Norway and, of course, Finland. Finland has one of the highest gun ownership rates in Europe, with around 32 civilian firearms per 100 people, which was shocking to me because I didn't think they had guns at all in Finland. I thought the way it's taught to us Americans that we're the only ones with guns in the world. Of all the industrialized countries. Now, here's what you were talking about. What type of training do police get? U.S. police academies spend far more time on firearm training than on de-escalating situations. 71 hours on firearm training in comparison to 21 hours in de-escalating a situation, according to a 2013 U.S. Bureau of Justice statistics report. And in the U.S., the escalation of force is at the discretion of the officer. Whereas in countries such as Norway and Finland, there are more rigorous rules as what is considered justified use of police force. Most of the training in the U.S. is focused on various types of use of force, primarily the various types of physical force. The communication skills are largely ignored by most police academies, according to the report. This is why you see officers very rapidly escalating from initial communication to the actual physical use of force, because this is how they are trained. ICJT, our executive director, Randy Shrewsbury, says that more emphasis also needs to be put on mental health training, both of when the officers are responding to suspects and for officers themselves. Police officers are often up to 5 times more likely to kill themselves than to be killed by homicide. We'd like to see a greater emphasis on police officer mental health training. Currently, they only get a few hours of training, if any, on self-care. Now, if what this report is saying is the truth, and I have no reason to doubt it, because I've looked at different reports that said something similar, then the issue isn't really defunding the police. The issue is that our police are just horribly undertrained to do what they need to do in terms of de-escalating situations and knowing how to deal with the public as a whole. Now, don't get me wrong, we arm these people to the gills with military equipment after giving them about 500 hours, of training. That's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. And then when I think about, the cultural images of police work, by and large, every Thursday, SWAT is on TV, and then you got FBI, you got NCIS. And if it's true, as I've read in several places, your average cop will go through an entire career without having fired his firearm in a criminal situation. Then why is it every week? Think about this. Kids grow up seeing these images.
Yeah.
Not even talking about the movies, but in the mind of most people, cops just every day get up like it's Dodge City.
Yeah.
And so, that portion of the population that grows up seeing these movies and these TV shows, and then graduates from high school, maybe goes into the military for 4 years, and then comes out and joins the police department. And so in their mind, they've had one TV show, the Andy Griffith Show, where you see a cop who spends most of his time de-escalating situations, talking people down, talking criminals down, talking his deputy down. And you got a ton of shows that are like Elliot Ness and The Untouchables. So it's locked in most of our minds that this is what cops do.
Right.
Their primary skill must be being more accurate with a handgun than anybody else, shooting faster than anybody else,
right.
And and also being able to shoot when necessary in such a way that they can wound the offender and not wound his hostage.
Right.
So they're perfect shots, they're quick shots. They would be desired by any military force in the world. And then they get let loose on our streets.
They do. And to me, part of it seems to be done on purpose, because it seems to me that we view crime in America and just and this extends to the prison industrial complex as well. We view the police as people whose job it is to deal with people and things we don't want to deal with ourselves. Okay, we view the police as these sort of to deal with the riffraff. That's what we and in the minds of much of middle class and upper class America, who's overwhelmingly white. That means minorities, blacks, Hispanics, who are in the ghetto or in the barrio. That means tamp down the sort of energy in those type in the ghetto or in the inner city. That means keep black men in check, keep Hispanic men in check. Arrest them, keep them. Keep our white families safe from them. That means the homeless. We're seeing a huge homeless situation, especially in California, where I just saw Crocodile Dundee. Crocodile Dundee. I was watching the news a few days ago. He apparently lives near the beach in Venice, and he's being in his what he says he's being crowded out by the homeless in that area, and you just see whole tent cities of homeless people camped out in Venice, but nobody's asking how all those people got there, and what happened to the economy that forced all those people into Skid Row, which is another place in LA that looks absolutely awful. I remember when I went to LA when I was a kid, we got my uncle to drive past there, and it looked like the Night of the Living Dead or something. It's Skid Row, and this is in the 90s. I can only imagine in a world where wealth inequality has gotten even worse, and the economy has dropped millions of people out of the middle class and out of the working class into the poverty class, what it looks like even especially now. And so we see the police as the people who we call to deal with the dangerous minorities and deal with the dangerous homeless people, the mentally ill, the people we view as losers and high school dropouts. And so I think there's a large portion of the society, and they won't say this in public, but they want the police to be crazy. They want the police to be crazy. They want them to be a little bit violent, at least a little bit violent, maybe a lot violent. They want to see them be used as sort of this sort of sword to wield against the unworthy, and that's what really that's kind of creepy to me.
Yeah, I remember when I got out. When I got out the Air Force and I came back home, my father asked me, why didn't I become a Gary police officer? And this is in 1983. So I think it was still during the time period of the family street gang. And it was two things I was crystal clear on. One, I knew that if I would have joined the Gary Police Department, that chances are I'd be on the graveyard shift. I hated working graveyard. I had learned that in 2 years, my first 2 years in the Air Force, I had rotating shifts, and me and graveyard shift just did not work. And the second thing was I was 5'7", about 145 pounds. And I just figured, I said, look, most of my life growing up, I always made sure I had big friends. Because I was the runt of the litter, But when I graduated from high school, I was 125 pounds. So I really didn't like getting into fights with people. Because I could not see the average person weighed more than me. So if I were a cop, if I had to get involved with any sort of drama with anybody, there's only two ways this was going to end. That either he was drunk, and so he really didn't feel like mixing up with no cop, or I was gonna have to shoot him because I'm only 5'7", about 130 pounds.
Yeah.
Being in the Air Force, like I said, I was in security, so I figured there's at least two of us. If we have to do something to somebody, I've got somebody there with me. He can help me out. Well, I wasn't so sure about that with the Gary Police, so that's why I never became a Gary cop. But even in my mind, my thoughts were, if you're a cop, you have to be able to beat everybody else up. You had to be able to shoot better than everybody else. You had to be able to run faster and longer than it. You may as well be wearing a blue and red suit.
Yeah. Right. And that's how the police are looked at, because there's so many riffraff in society and drop shots.